Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I live in a quiet countryside where usually nothing is happening. I'm an 18-year-old girl who could easily walk around my hometown alone without even being scared because it's really safe here. Basically no crimes. So, as usual, me and my dog went for a walk one evening. It was nice weather outside, so I decided to go for a nearby field. I usually let my dog out of her leash there, so it was fun for both of us. She's a nice dog and always comes when I call for her. We get to the field and everything is going really well and nothing seems off, except I have this kind of odd feeling in my gut that I never usually have. The last time I had the same feeling when I was 8 years old and we were driving at night with my family. I had the same feeling then and I told it to my parents. I feel like something is wrong. You should be careful. I said something like that. They slowed down because I was oddly serious at the moment. A minute after I said it, a deer came out of nowhere and we would have crushed if we had gone by the same speed as a minute before. We were all shocked and my mom thanked me. I still remember it like it was yesterday. However, in the field, 10 years later, I get the same gut feeling. Whatever I think and keep going, completely ignoring it. We roll around the fields in a nearby forest until the sunset starts to set. I put my dog back to her leash and decide to leave from one of the tiny paths that go through a small forest. It's not a popular way to go, but it's quick. As I'm walking along that path, I suddenly spot a silhouette in the end of the road just before the forest starts. I think nothing of it at that point and just keep walking, but after just a little while I have a strong gut feeling and stare at the silhouette for a while. It's then that I notice that the silhouette is staring at me without moving. I just think that maybe they were waiting for someone, because at first the silhouette looked like a child's, but as I got closer I noticed that it wasn't a child but a grown man who was riding what looked like a child's bicycle. It was a blue-green boy's bicycle. His legs were way too long for it and his whole body looked like he was forcing himself to ride it. It was a really unsettling sight. Still, my dumb self didn't want to turn around and have a couple of kilometers waste of time, and even though it was creepy looking, I still thought maybe he's waiting for someone that comes from my way. But every step I take he follows me with intense expression. I'm only like a 20 meters away from him when he starts to do a weird motion by jumping on his bike, smiling the ugliest and the most unsettling smile I've ever seen, just staring at me with wide eyes. He kinda looks like he was expecting something and is so excited about it that he needs to jump. He looks like he's in his 50s or something, very long and thin legs and arms, bald, and that creepy unsettling smile. That's when my alarm rings went on. I glanced behind me and no one was there. It was just me, an 18-year-old small girl with her fluffy, definitely not a guard, dog. I turn around 360 and start to jog where I came from, just in case. I glanced at him and sighed in relief when I noticed he wasn't following me or anything. I thought that maybe he wasn't waiting for me after all and called myself stupid and a scaredy cat. I was so wrong. My adrenaline starts to slow down again as I'm in the middle of the fields and I still see no sign of him following me. I let my dog out of her leash again and she starts to run around. I'm nearly at the end of the field. I only have a kilometer or some of forest part before I get to my home after the field part. When my dog spots a rabbit or deer or some interesting thing and flies towards it, I panic because she has never done that before and yell for her. I yell plenty of times for her loudly and finally she comes back. I'm relieved that nothing happened to her, but as I put her back to her leash I noticed something form the corner of my eye. The freaking bald long legs is biking towards me. He's not looking at the ground when he bikes, but me. Freak out wasn't enough to express my feeling in that moment. I have never seen a human who looked so crazy. More than crazy. What surprised me the most was that he was biking through a field, and I can tell you it is not an easy field to even walk sometimes. It has muddy ponds that you need to jump over, but that psychopath just biked through them. He was struggling a lot to bike there but somehow managed to still do that. I didn't watch for another second behind me because I just started running. I ran so freaking full speed, and I have asthma that I saw black and nearly collapsed. My lungs hurt so bad that I thought I was dying, but the adrenaline kept my blood running, and my legs too. Once I glanced behind me and he was there, struggling badly to keep up his full speed on the field grounds with that ugly white smile and the way too little bike. After that I just ran like crazy until I found a house, hid in their yard without even minding that I was in someone else's yard. It didn't matter to me in that moment at all. I waited a while with my breathing stuck in my throat, but he didn't come. I was planning to yell as loudly as I could if he found me, but he never did. At some point the adrenaline started leaving my system and I left my hiding spot. I ran again until I reached an area which had multiple people in their yards, so I would have helped if I saw him again, but I didn't. I called the cops on my phone but couldn't bring myself to call, mostly because I had no proof and I didn't want my parents to find out because they are overprotective protecting so I wouldn't probably leave my house anymore. I still live with them. Side note, I've been paranoid after this incident. My dog was frightened too. I guess she noticed something was really off too. I swear to God that I will always listen to my gut when it's telling me something from now on. A couple of years ago at university, a 20-year-old woman, decided to join a project group that catered to a niche interest. The group met on Thursday evening, so I went along for the first time, excited to join. I had a pretty good time and met some nice people. There was one guy sitting near me who didn't say very much but kept staring at me while we were working on our project. I didn't think much of it, assuming he was just awkward around girls or something, so I tried to be friendly and speak to him the same as I was speaking to the other people in our project group. He still didn't really say anything to me, he'd just look at me, but he was working hard on the project, so again I didn't think much of it aside from that you get all kinds of people in the world. At the end of the meet, I said goodbye to the group I'd been working with and agreed to see them at the next meetup. I said goodbye to the strange guy as well since he was standing near me silently with everyone else. Feeling good about the project, I turned away and left the building to walk home. But as I walked away from the group, I noticed the strange guy immediately peeled away from the group and was walking right behind me. I turned and tried to be super friendly by saying, "Oh, I'll be walking down that road, so I'll say goodbye now and see you next time." He said nothing and kept walking behind me. I was getting slightly creeped out, but at this stage I was mostly annoyed because I wanted to walk alone listening to music. I had a long walk home and didn't feel like a pained interaction with this strange awkward guy. Anyway, after quite a while of saying nothing, he was still walking with me, but he was now next to me, still completely silent. I was starting to get majorly creeped out, but I still tried to reason with myself that he's just an awkward dude who happens to live in the same direction as me. We were walking towards a common student area, so I decided I'd keep walking until I got to a grocery store not far from home. I also considered that should he have bad intentions, I wanted to stay friendly to him so as not to anger him. He continues walking with me in silence, and by the time we reach the grocery store, it's been about 20 minutes. I'm thinking I just need to get rid of him by going in here, as he'll just continue onto his house, right? Nope. I say, well, I've got to get loads of shopping done, so I'll say goodbye and I go into the store. I see him hesitate at the door, but he says nothing. I go in the store and glance back, and he's still outside the store, but thank God he didn't come in with me. So I run around the aisles for a bit to waste time, and then I see him crossing the end of one aisle inside the store. I grab something random off the shelf to take to the cashier, having some vague plan of telling them what was happening. But being naive, I was still worried about reading the situation all wrong and getting a poor awkward guy in trouble for nothing. So I didn't say anything. While paying, the guy saw me and waited for me at the exit. I walked past him and this time said nothing at all. I decided to just go straight home, since I lived with male roommates who I thought would be able to help me, and it was the first thing I thought of to do. Probably very stupid to reveal where I lived, but I was freaked out and not thinking. I didn't want to use my phone to call anyone as I was worried it would just make the guy angry to hear me saying I was scared of him. So he continued walking next to me and we power walked to my house. At this point I realized with shock that none of my roommates would be home at this time, so I was actually alone. The guy was still silent and he actually followed behind me as I walked up the path to my front door. I repeat the next part over and over in my mind for all the things that could have gone wrong and all the possibilities of what could have happened. I decided I had to just get inside and lock the door at any cost, so I thought the best thing to do was shock him. I got my keys ready in my hand and turned them in the lock. Then I turned around and flung my arms around his neck saying thank you so much for walking me home. It was so nice to meet you, and just being really loud and friendly and hugging. It did shock him, and in the next second I removed myself from him, turned, slipped through the door and slammed it shut. He didn't have time to react and I got in safely. After going upstairs, I looked through the window and saw him go back out to the road and just stand there for a bit. Then he just walked off back up the road. Goes without saying, I never went back to the project group and it made me extremely anxious about letting anyone know where I lived. I looked out for the guy constantly but never saw him again in my road, so for whatever reason he didn't come back. Don't know what his intentions were, but it was just bizarre. It made me very vigilant, and overnight I went from naive and friendly to suspicious and private. At the time of this story, I was 14. I'm a dude. This takes place during the winter. I enjoy taking night walks. I never go out too late, but I go out when it's still dark. I usually do this because in the area I live in, my primary school friends lived in the same area and I wanted to avoid them at all costs. I also just enjoyed the nighttime because I found it peaceful. One day, I decided to go out later. I had just come home from somewhere at around 8 at night, so I told my parents I was heading out for a walk. They were hesitant to let me go, as I usually went at around 6 in the afternoon, but eventually they let me as long as I had my phone on me, so I headed out. I usually dress in all black with a hood on and a face mask, and I walk with my hands in my pockets. Bonus points if I have gloves on. Usually people who pass me on the street avoid me because of the all black attire I wear. Anyways, after roughly half an hour I had almost completed my walk, so close that I could see my house from where I was at. That's when I saw a light. It was a bright white light, moving randomly but generally staying in the same spot. I have pretty bad eyesight and it was dark, so as I walked I squinted to try and see what it was. Turns out, it was a dude also wearing all black, but with a headlamp. I walked closer, but slowed down my pace significantly. I got a really uneasy feeling, and I didn't like him at all. I wanted to just get home, but I would have had to walk past him in order to get to my house. I thought about turning around, but I really didn't want to walk the 30 minutes all the way back, as it would probably be 9 at night by then and I didn't want to worry my parents. I continued to walk very slowly, watching him carefully. Suddenly, he stopped moving, then he turned around and stopped again. The light was still. My heart dropped. There was a grassy area right next to the road that I was walking on, so I moved to the grassy area and began slowly walking there instead. I was pretty far from him still, so I thought to myself, if this guy runs towards you, run faster. It was a tense couple of seconds before he began jogging, not moving directly towards me but still coming in my general direction. I didn't run quite yet, as he certainly could have just been a jogger running along the road. I thought that until his jog broke into a run, and this time it was straight for me. I inhaled sharply and booked it in the opposite direction. I had always been quite a fast runner, and my legs were quite strong because I would go on a lot of bike rides in my area, which has a lot of steep hills. I was able to run for a solid 10 minutes, not daring to look behind me. I made it up a large hill before stopping to catch my breath. I looked to see if he was chasing me, but the only thing I could see of him was that light. It was moving around the same way I had seen before, and it was shining directly into my eyes. I jogged the rest of the way home. My mom saw that I was sweaty and exhausted, but I just told her I had gone for a run this time instead, which wasn't far from the truth. My boyfriend bought a house in a super stereotypical white suburban neighborhood. Living there was super awkward at first because I'm a person of color, and while the neighbors were friendly, they often would make backhanded remarks or comments. Because of this, I tried to avoid socializing with people as much as possible. A few months after moving in, I noticed there was a house a few doors down that never had lights on or cars pulling in and out of the driveway, but the trash was always put out at the end of the driveway on trash day. I started paying more attention to the house after noticing this. I started noticing odd things about the house, like noticing flickery but super dim lights from certain windows and blinds sometimes closing and opening. Anyways, one day I was walking the dog and I passed the house. A man was in the front yard observing the landscaping, and he waved at me and said hello and introduced himself as the neighbor who lives in the house. As he approached me, I noticed that he smelled really terrible, like poop and mildew, which was really odd because he seemed well dressed and well groomed. The way he smiled also made me feel uneasy. He was always smiley with his teeth, and his eyes had a deadness to them. I told him I was wondering if anyone lived in the house, because for the most part it seemed abandoned. He just shrugged, but he seemed to be in a hurry to end the conversation after I brought this up, which was fine with me. As I walked away from the house, I kept turning around to make sure he wasn't following me, and I kept getting the chills. A few days after meeting him, I was on another walk with the dog, and I noticed that the front door to the house was open. I thought this was odd, because it would be letting all the heat into the house, and it was the middle of summer. The next day, the door was still open, so I called the police to do a wellness check. Once the police arrived, I watched from my house to see if I could see anything going on. The police officers didn't step foot in the house, and about half an hour later a fire engine showed up. The police officer and the fighters stayed talking outside for a while after the firemen had entered and exited the house, but not much else happened. About a month later, my boyfriend was walking the dog and he stopped to talk to some women who were clearing things out of the house. They told him that the house belonged to their father, who was currently in an inpatient dementia treatment, and that the house had been inhabited by a squatter. They told him that house was full of mold on the wall that was almost an inch thick, and that the man had been hoarding roadkill in one of rooms. It also showed signs of him living in the house, including a space cleared out for him on an old moldy mattress in the upstairs bedroom. They had found candles and a salt circle in one room, as well as notebooks full of writings about the devil and devoting yourself to Satan and other worldly alien beings. I guess on the end the squatter had just decided to up and leave the house alone. The women have since cleared out the house and it has been gutted and remodeled. I'm not sure if they are selling it or what's the plan with it, but the memory of that man and his empty smile and the smell coming off of him will stay with me forever. If you're liking this video, all I ask is that you make sure to subscribe to my channel and like this video. Thank you. In 2016, I was 26. I worked a seasonal job at a warehouse about a 30-minute drive from my flat. One day after work, I ordered some takeout from a place maybe 10 blocks from home. There was a gas station next door, so I filled up and left my car at the pump to say hello to some friends who lived across the street while I waited for my food to be ready. Maybe 15 minutes of chatting, walking back across the street, grabbing my food, across the lot to the gas station, into my car, and a 2-minute drive to my flat. At the time, I lived in a duplex flat with a gutted adjacent flat attached. Behind me was an old vacant motel that was currently being gutted and repurposed into studio apartments. The nearest building to the left was an old clapper bar leading to the main street and the highway, and to the right was an empty lot where a building that was demolished nearly a decade earlier once stood. The rest of the neighborhood was lower income Hispanic. I pulled into my drive, noticed a car driving relatively slow past. I went inside and leashed my dog up to let her out. As I was standing in the yard waiting for the dog to do her business, a maroon Subaru Forester, newer at the time, drove by slowly multiple times before pulling into my drive. I assumed he was lost or looking for something and walked up to him as he got out of the car and approached me. He looked like any older white man in his 50s. I remember he kind of reminded me of my dad. I asked him if he needed anything and he replied, "No, I just was checking on you." I asked him if I knew him, figuring maybe I didn't recognize him. He replied, "I saw you up by the gas station. You seemed like you needed help. I'm just saying if you need anything." I'm usually pretty slow to the cut, but at this point, I'd pieced together that this man had followed me from the gas station to a friend's house to a restaurant and then home, and immediately didn't sit right. He was just standing there and he wasn't leaving, and I had time to process the situation. I thought maybe he's an older guy. I'm a younger girl. He's on this side of town in a nice car for whatever reason. Maybe he thinks I'm a trick. And I said again, "I'm sorry. I'm not picking up what you're putting down. Why are you here?" "Nothing. I'm just a nice guy checking to see if you're alright." I specifically remember him calling himself a nice guy. During the period of this conversation, I had made it to my stoop and he had closed the gap. Behind was door, then me, the dog, then him and his car. I told him you should leave, to which he asked, "Do you wish you had a nicer place?" And if my dog, a medium-sized German Shepherd, was friendly and reached out toward her for a pet. I yanked her behind me and said no and pretty aggressively told him, "Dude, leave." He finally started backing away. I stood in the drive until he got in his car and drove off. I took down his license plate and car description, then I went inside. 15 minutes later, he pulled back into my drive, sat there for a second, and drove off. That's when I decided to file a police report. It didn't sit right. I just figured it was nothing, but I lived alone and if anything happened, I'd want a record. It was 6 or 7 at this point, so the non-emergency line was closed. I filled out a report online and never heard back from the police. Never saw that man or his maroon Forester again, either. He might have just been a weird old man. I never saw any reports of anyone going missing from Nevada in 2016, either. I know it's a stretch and probably has nothing to do with anything, but I only just thought of this again in the last few months. They caught that guy in New York, and I wondered if he was in Nevada before it ever came out. Same age, same build, but how do you remember a face from 7 years ago? I just remember the man at my place having more salt and pepper hair. He treated me like he thought I was soliciting, and he wanted to help. He did not respect my boundaries. It was probably nothing and not the same man. Scary, off situations just have a way of sticking with you. Maybe trying to connect this is my way of making it make sense. I used to hang out with my cousin a lot. We were both 10-year-old boys at the time of this encounter and I'm now 33 years old. It has stayed with me ever since. We'd mostly spend our youth roaming the streets, not causing trouble, but kicking footballs around fields, climbing, hanging out with kids our age, the typical stuff before phones and Netflix became commonplace. One day we decided to go and explore a part of town that we'd never explored before. It meant going through alleyways and back streets. The trail would actually end approximately 2 to 3 minutes from my house, which was a safe part of the neighborhood. It was a sunny day, albeit not too warm, and my cousin and I had been walking for what seemed like miles. The journey we planned was supposed to go on for longer, but we got bored and decided to take a detour home. The detour involved cutting through an alleyway that looked a little bit like the Coronation Street General, if anyone is familiar with the television show. To the left of us were terraced houses, and to the right of us, steel fences with sharp points to deter any would-be thieves. We continued up here, and soon enough, one of the kids from our school lived there, and his mom shouted, "What are you boys doing here?" her. We ran, and I don't know why, we just didn't like her son and her tone was accusatory. As we ran, we bumped into another kid. "Don't go that way," he said, as his voice trailed off as he ran farther and farther away from us, down the opposite end of the alleyway. We shrugged and continued on. It got darker with the trees and foliage, but we soon emerged from the alley, and that's when we saw the lone boy. A boy aged 10 or 12 stood there. His eyes were empty. He had a vacant look on his face. Well, the half of his face that we could see well enough. Above his mouth was covered with a veil, somewhat like a Halloween mask of some description, except it was June. Halloween was months away. As we got closer, we noticed the boy had a kitchen knife in his hands. I mean a fully real, stainless steel kitchen knife, both hands on the handle. The sunlight made the blade glisten. We cracked a joke, cooking outside, but he looked at us blankly, no emotion, nothing. We were too freaked out to move, and that's when we realized he hadn't moved either. Not a muscle. We saw him blink, but physically, the knife hadn't been raised up or pointed at us, just held closely to his chest, blade pointing upwards. We figured we should get away because instinct told us this was weird and a bit freaky. Going back down the alley didn't seem like a safe option. Being stuck in an alleyway with a strange kid with a knife didn't seem smart. In front of us was a road on a steep hill. It was our best bet. We walked up to the top of the hill, keeping an eye on the kid. The top of the hill was 2 to 3 minutes from my house in terms of distance. At last, we felt safe. As we looked back down the hill, the lone kid had put the knife by his leg, now holding it in one hand, but remained in the exact same spot, and stared right back up at us, expressionless. We told our parents what had happened and they called a local community enforcement team to scout the area. Apparently the kid was found with the knife, but we never heard why he was there or what he was doing. 23 years after it happened, it's still on my mind. While I was living and studying in the capital of my country, I had a small rented basement of a 1917 built house next to a nightclub. I was preparing to go to sleep quite early since I had class at 8 in the morning the next day. Right before I fell asleep, I remembered that I forgot to lock the door, but since the city I lived in was generally quite safe, and the only way to get to the entrance of my place was past a front gate, all around to the other side of the house and down some stairs, I didn't think much of it and proceeded to fall asleep. Skip forward to the middle of the night, I wake up and feel someone or something slowly pulling my blanket off me. In a confused state, I extend my hand and feel a hairy, male arm under my fingers. My first thought was, oh, this is probably my drunk flatmate, but then I remembered that he is at his girlfriend's place on the other side of town. In pitch black, I jump from my bed, rush to the light switch, and as I turn it on, I find a stranger around my age, a student, standing in his underwear by my bed, with his underwear clearly wet. My initial reaction was to stay calm, since I had no idea if this dude was violent or what was even going on in the first place. I calmly asked him, "Man, what are you doing here?" He was clearly very confused as well and took a sit on a recliner I had in my tiny room. And there we are, both in our underwear, him covered in something wet and I on the border of pissing myself, and what does he do? He extends his hand and introduces himself to me. At that point I go, "Okay dude, get out of my house," and start escorting him to the hallway where I find all his clothes and shoes on the floor. As I am escorting him out, he goes into the bathroom and locks himself inside. I hear him turn on the shower and proceed to knock on the door saying, "Hey man, if you don't leave right now, I'm calling the cops," to which he replies, "I'm not afraid of the police." Well, that's just perfect, isn't it? A few minutes pass and he steps out of the bathroom butt naked, with my flatmate's towel around his waist, looks at me looking kind of content, and says, "Hey, did you see? They've got a shower here." At that point I am fuming. Who's got a shower? This is my house. You're a total stranger and you broke into my place. Suddenly an expression of complete fear appears on his face. Oh my god, what have I done? Jesus Christ, he starts exclaiming as he is very awkwardly trying to get dressed in the hallway. Then I managed to get him out of the house. I even called one of his friends from my phone to come pick him up at the club. Turns out he's from a completely other town and came to party to the capital, got kicked out of the club for starting a fight, and somehow managed to get into my place. To this day I have no idea what he was on or how he managed to find my apartment, as it is quite hidden from the street. Let's just say I never forgot to lock the door from that day. When I was 21, I was living in a 2-bedroom apartment with my 15-year-old sister and our mom. How we ended up there is another story in itself. The complex was in the same town I grew up in. It wasn't the best complex around, but it also wasn't the worst. I took comfort in the fact that we would see the security guards roaming quite often because the laundry units were in every other building, and of course, our building didn't have a unit, so I felt safer knowing there were guards around when I did my laundry late at night. I was on the top floor, so I'd have to drag my laundry down 5 flights of stairs, walk outside to the neighboring building and go to the lower level to do laundry. One day I noticed a new security guard. He was a large man and probably about 6'3", very muscular build. He wasn't as friendly as other guards. He didn't really acknowledge residents, so he was a little scary and intimidating, but that's good for the job he had. My friend lived in the same complex in a building behind me. There was a little playground and tennis court that separated front buildings from back buildings. One day my friend texted me around 10 at night saying she went to do her laundry and she saw him lurking around the building she needed to go into. The guards were only supposed to survey the grounds outside and only go inside a building for suspicious activity. They only had keys to the building front doors but didn't have keys for laundry units. At least that's what we were told. He ended up following her into the laundry room where she verbally assaulted him and threatened to call management if he didn't get out. She said he stood still just glaring at her and left the building without saying a word. Now that this was fresh in my mind, I was on high alert. A few weeks go by and I come home after work around 9:30. When I pulled into my lot, I noticed the power was out. The whole parking lot and all the buildings are pitch black, no light sources detected anywhere. I decided to back my car into a spot so I could have a clear view of my building from my car. I was a little hesitant to get out because I had some bags of hair product I bought from work, some food I picked up, my water bottle and my purse to carry, and I knew it would take some time to gather my stuff and lock up my car. We also had some homeless people nearby that would dig through the dumpster bins and search the lot for cigarette butts that were still smokable. One man in particular seemed very strung out and unpredictable, so I didn't want to have a run-in when I could barely see anything. I called my mom to come down and open the door for me, but she didn't answer. My sister never answers her phone, so I didn't even bother trying. I sat in the car contemplating my next move. By then my eyes had somewhat adjusted to the darkness and I decided to stop being such a chicken and just go inside. As I gathered up my things, the power suddenly came back on and I felt so relieved. But when I looked into the windows of my building, that relief quickly turned to fear and suspicion. I saw that same security guard that followed my friend standing on our top floor landing and staring at our door. There were 3 other doors on my floor and he was standing in front of ours. He didn't move for a few seconds and just stared at our door with his head leaned forward like he was trying to listen through our door. He then slowly turned and made his way downstairs. I called my mom again and she answered this time. I told her what I saw and she came down to get me and they called building management. I never saw him again. I don't know what happened, if he quit or got fired, but I was very relieved that we wouldn't have to deal with his strange behavior anymore. Apparently other residents had strange encounters with him as well. It's scary when you can't even feel safe in your own home. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.